All right, so before we begin our final session of this year's conference, I'd like to share some really exciting news. Due to the popular demand of the first Workplace Racial Equity Challenge, we are going to be offering it again in June, starting on June 2nd. The challenge is free and we invite all to attend. I want to mention a special thanks to two of our panelists who are on today, but especially Karen Spiller. Karen was one of the original curators of Food Solutions New England Racial Equity Challenge, and it is that challenge that inspired ours. So we are thrilled to be able to have Karen joining us today. And thank you very much for all that you have done to move this conversation forward. So starting on June 2nd, anyone who signs on will be receiving weekday emails that will allow you to access crucial racial equity topics, as well as a quick dive or quick look or a deep dive. So we invite you all to attend. It does incorporate New Hampshire specific background, and it is supported by weekly discussion groups that we'll be doing with actually Jermaine Morris going to be one of our facilitators again with these sessions. So it is a fantastic opportunity to explore and to reflect on both our history and how we can move forward with action and positive impact. So, and I do want to mention, I want to thank Barry Dunn for joining the original group of sponsors for this challenge. Barry Dunn is joining to help us so that we can pay all of our facilitators for their time, and we appreciate having Barry Dunn's participation in order to move this forward. So you can register at nhbsr.org/equity. So we are very thankful to Mascoma Bank, who sponsors many of our programs. Mascoma shared a skit on their diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts at our Sustainability Slam last fall. So it was very clear to us that this effort is very important to them. So we thank them for their support of this panel and their workplace efforts. So here to share a few words and introduce our racial equity panel is Mariah Davis, Community Specialist at Mascoma Bank.
Everyone. My name is Mariah Davis, and I'm the Community Impact Specialist at Mascoma Bank. Mascoma is proud to be sponsoring today's Racial Equity Panel. We have 28 branch locations in New Hampshire and Vermont. We are a mutual savings bank, and we don't answer to stockholders, but respond to the needs of our community where we live, work, and play. As a certified B Corporation, we strive to be a force for positive change. As a company focused on the value of mutual respect and trust, we recognize that by embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion, we strengthen our communities and ourselves. We are a better, smarter, and more innovative bank when we welcome different perspectives, experiences, and approaches. Joining us today is moderator Karen Spiller from the UNH Sustainability Institute, Nadine Petty from UNH Office of Diversity, Dan Weeks from Revision Energy, Valentina Dingle from Prime Buckholtz, and Jermaine Moore from the Mars Hill Group. Mascoma Bank is proud to partner with NHBSR and bring this important work to socially conscious businesses in New Hampshire. Together, we can work to bring positive change to our communities. Thank you.
So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and we can invite our panel to begin this discussion. So Karen, welcome again, and thank you for being our moderator today.
It is my honor. Thank you so much, Michelle. And thank you everyone for joining us for this important, it's always important. It's important when we're talking about how we're going to be in our communities so that we can lift up and be sure that we are being that yin and yang in every place we are. It was really so much aligned with the way we bring ourselves into our workplace. We bring who we are, and sometimes who we are is evolving. So we're going to talk a little bit here about the importance of racial equity as we're evolving to being something different and creating the culture of belonging, excellence, and that really will result in the kind of future that we're wanting to build, the kind of current in the moment we're trying to live. And so in that, I'd love to just kind of lift up the fact that these are 4 leaders and they're serving sectors of the New Hampshire business world, and they're sharing it, how they're doing their work. They're going to share that with us. how they're navigating the uncharted while amplifying the humanity and sustainability and centering diversity, equity, and inclusion, but racial equity at the core. They're doing it, Nadine's doing it as doing the business of higher ed, and Val's doing it and doing the business of investing, consulting. And we've got Jermaine doing the business of leadership development. And then we also have Dan here doing the business of sustainable energy. So all that is intertwined. It is so important to understand that they're doing this in the midst to serve us for a better understanding of non-negotiable need to create a culture and nurture that, again, culture, diversity, equity, and inclusion in our workplace with a heart set. Emily said this earlier, I would say yin is lead is that heart set, and the mindset is a yang lead, and everything we were doing. So it really is important that when we're talking about the me, we bring our me's into the we's. So understanding how we are evolving, how our mindsets and heart sets have to be willing to and leaning into all the things that she shared earlier about listening, asking questions, looking for the commonality, looking for the diversity to lead you to being something different. And the more diverse voices we have, the better any solution will be, any work will be, any workplace will be more vibrant in that. And so they're doing all this in the midst of the pandemics. And I think about them in the midst of yes, COVID-19, and yes, we are still in it. We have vaccines, but we're still in it. And then we're in the midst of the pandemic of 2020 with racism, not being discovered, but revealed more blatantly, and the violent deaths, killings, and just constant violence against people of color. And then I also think about it as the ongoing economic pandemic, the health pandemic, and still fluctuating through all of that. So the questions, we're going to have some conversation here from their different perspectives, from their different sectors of our business world, and just kind of letting us know, giving us some insights of how they do it. How do they do all of this in the midst of? And so one of the questions we're going to pose and explore on right now is thinking of where we are right now. And this is for you, Val, and Dan, and Jermaine, and Nadine. Just thinking about it, where we are right now. What does this moment mean for you and your organization? And why is it important? And really think about it in terms of the possibilities. What are you learning in the midst? So, Dan, you look like you're ready.
I don't know, Karen, but I will try. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you and this very esteemed panel. It's a great honor to be part of this closing conversation to what has been I think for all of us, a very meaningful conference this year. And boy, do we look forward to being back together in the flesh. If I may, I'd like to take this first question in just a slightly different direction by spending maybe 2 or 3 minutes on where we are and also how we got here. And these are truths that our company Revision has been exploring, particularly in the last year, and truths which we probably all know, but which I do think bear repeating. And to start, the physical reality. There's one race of people on this earth, we call us humans, and we are, according to the best science, more than 99% the same genetically. In fact, there's more genetic variation within what we commonly call different racial groups than there is between them. There is this tiny pigment called melanin, which can be found in every person's skin. It causes the color brown and it gives protection from the sun. If your more recent ancestors were exposed to less sunlight in a more northern climate like mine, your melanin is less active and your skin is a lighter shade of brown. But if your more recent ancestors were exposed to more sunlight living near the equator, like my wife's, then your melanin is more active and your skin is a darker shade of brown. That's the physical reality of what we call race, as I think we all know. But then there's the social reality, which our company has been trying to understand much more deeply. And in brief, that is that for 4 centuries now, or maybe to go back 4 centuries ago, a king in one of those more northern climates discovered that his arms and navy enabled him to kidnap people to the south and sell them into a condition of permanent servitude, which made him and his friends very, very wealthy. We know that his family commissioned a writer to glorify and indeed justify his exploits, and that writer invented a concept called blackness to describe the people who his employer was enslaving, who had a bit more active melanin in their skin. Although those people came from great civilizations and were manifestly equally human, that writer began what was an immensely profitable tradition of subordinating one of these so-called races to materially benefit another. And so for the last 4 centuries, this tradition of so-called white supremacy has thrived. It's become insinuated into every aspect of our social and cultural life, into our laws even, and it's delivered, I'd argue, the greatest wealth transfer ever known from one people group to another through those centuries of enslavement and de facto enslavement and systemic inequality, which continue. And so today it manifests in children who look like me being born with almost 10 times the family wealth of children who look like my wife on average. And this, we know, will never, ever be undone until it is first acknowledged for what it is: systemic racism born of the false ideology of white supremacy, and then systematically, persistently dismantled, including, I would argue, through reparations. So that's where not just we as individuals, but our businesses, Revision Energy, and every institution to which we belong come in. I go back to Ta-Nehisi Coates' quote, "Race is the child of racism, not the father." We've got to grasp this truth. It's taken us a long time. It is still taking us time. But for our company, this process has begun with trying to go to this truth, which frankly, I was never taught growing up in New Hampshire schools, or even getting the opportunity to go to some great universities. So I'll leave it at that for now. I'd love to talk about what beyond the truth we're trying to do, but I appreciate the chance to just share what for me is an important distillation of this reality.
Thanks, Dan. Jermaine, you're nodding your head.
Yeah, I first of all, thank you all for having me here today. It is such an honor to be a part of this panel. And Dan, I love where you started, really addressing race as a social construct. It is something that was made up for nefarious purposes. And I think we start there because the question becomes, do we believe that lie or not? And I also appreciate the question because you asked, what does this moment mean? And moment has its root in the Latin word momentum, right? A momentum is this time of change, and enough of a particle to make a change, to tip the scales. And I think we have to grasp the momentum that we've gained over the last year. People's eyes are opened and minds are opened to new ideas and new information. And I'm happy to see it. I want to share a quote by Martin Luther King Jr., which I always think about. It says, "Time is neutral. It can be used either destructively or constructively. More and more, I feel that people of ill will have used time much more effectively than have the people of goodwill. We will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the hateful words and action of bad people, but for the appalling silence of good people. Human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts of men willing to work. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation. We must use time creatively and acknowledge that the time is always right to do right." That's from his Why Can't We Wait? And I like that because I think over the past year, a lot of our eyes have been open to, hey, maybe we're not as far along as we thought we were. And I think as a society, we've become complacent. I think the notion was, the thinking is, wait, didn't we just have a Black president? Like, aren't we in this post-racial world? But I think 2020, if anything, opened the eyes of many folks to realize that there's so much more work to do. So just like those men 400 or 500 years ago who planted this thought, this idea that took root to produce this white supremacist system that we have today. We too have thoughts and ideas that we can use to combat this lie. And I say we take advantage of it, we leverage it, and not let it die out. For absolutely sure. Those are my initial thoughts.
Jermaine, thank you.
Yeah.
And Nadine,
Great foundation. Oh, is it okay if I jump in?
Oh, absolutely.
I'm going to kind of bring it back to my organization because that's how I heard the question and sort of wanted to talk about it from that perspective. I mean, I think we're at an inflection point. There's been such a groundswell of momentum both inside our firm and outside of the firm, driven by the heated social climate and I think an increased appetite for meaningful change, particularly as it relates to racial inequities. Now, as an investment advisory firm, most of our clients are nonprofits. They're mission driven, and DEI has grown in increasing importance in terms of those missions. So we're not only being asked about what we as a firm are doing and even challenged about what we as a firm are doing, we're also being asked, how can we help our clients incorporate DEI into their investment portfolios, which isn't always an easy thing to do, but it's well worth the effort. We feel it's very important to be aligned with our clients and to be more reflective of them. So most of our clients are actually not in New Hampshire. There are quite a few, but most of them are outside. So again, we want to be more reflective. In addition to geographical challenges around attracting and retaining diverse talent, the investment industry as a whole has struggled massively with this, like forever. That said, it does feel like there's been a slight shift in recent years, and I think there's an opportunity for us to model our DEI practices to the broader industry. But to effect that meaningful change that people have an appetite for, we're going to need partners, collaborators, fellow advocates, because going alone won't move the dial. So I do think there are new opportunities, or I think new opportunities are emerging for more organizations to collaborate with each other, even if they're direct competitors.
Oh, thank you. And so when we're talking about this, I think I said this earlier, and we're working with organizations, but organizations are individuals that bring their biases, their beliefs, their lived experience to wherever they are. And Nadine, this is where I think about the university and our students and our community that we're building. You know, share what this moment in time means in that context.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So at UNH, we have a lot of various initiatives tied around diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice. As it pertains to the students, we have a lot of students coming to us from New Hampshire, from very rural communities, from areas where they were not exposed to a lot of diversity, not just racial or ethnic diversity, but just diversity in political ideologies, diversity tied to sexual orientation, other types of diversity. And so this is really an opportunity. We're in a space of time where our students are eager to learn. They're eager to embrace information and to have conversations with people who are unlike them. And what we're seeing more and more are student-driven initiatives on campus that is supported, of course, by administration. The students are the ones engaging in grassroots efforts to call out injustice, to call out white supremacy, to call out all kinds of unfairness, not just on our campus, but just sort of in the community and in the nation in general. And so specifically, the way that the administration is responding is we're looking at this from a holistic standpoint. Our job is to educate our students. Our job is to prepare them to be good model citizens of the world, to function productively in an increasingly global environment, right? And our job also is to help students understand in some aspects, the moral impetus for diversity and for equity and for inclusion and for social justice and for fairness and all of that. The opportunity to be civil and to engage civilly with each other. And so we have been looking at general education coursework, and I'll just say this very briefly, the way that our coursework has been set up in the past is that we would have students be introduced to diversity in formal ways the third year, so as juniors. And that was problematic because then you have students who are coming in from spaces who maybe they had not interacted in diverse ways before with diverse constituents, going 2-3 years in higher education without really having that formalized for them. And so we're looking at ways to implement that in their very first year so that every student who comes to UNH as a freshman gets exposed to some form of diversity, whether it's a class that talks about race relations, whether it's a class that talks about, you know, global positioning or global standing or international relations, that they have that experience their very first year. So that's just one of the many ways that we're addressing the student learning and the student outcomes in relation to this. I think you might be muted.
You started right there talking about how you're doing it. And so I'd like to go back to Jermaine. I know you're working with leadership development.
Yeah.
How are you doing it? How are you doing? How are you helping organizations, you know, incorporate this in their culture, in the soul and heart of it,
Yeah.
and just shifting the whole DNA?
Karen, great question. And we start there. The first training that I do with organizations is called Building a Diverse and Inclusive Culture, because it has to start with culture. Culture is where our DNA resides. It's how things are done in this space. Because that is the only way this work is sustained over time, right? It's the only way we can make it not just a check the box, one off to the side session or focus. So we want to incorporate it into who we are. And how we do that is to connect it to the values of the culture. What I find is it's a much easier transition if we can make the connection that this work is very much in line with who you are. It's just a way for you to be the best version of yourself, right? This is how we live out the values of we respect one another, or we value teamwork or collaboration. So we really start with there, because culture is enduring, and culture is enduring over time. A training program can come and go. A dialogue session can come and go, but culture sticks around. So we have to start with culture and give it the priority that it deserves. So typically, the first things I'm doing with clients and working with organizational leaders, I'm asking them to connect those dots. And then there's also the dots that I think we have to connect personally. I love how Nadine said it's a moral impetus, right? Because I can share McKinsey & Company reports about how it's good business to embrace diversity, equity, inclusion. There's a lot of studies out there that say companies who do this well outperform companies who don't do it well. And we have to be ready to make that business case. Some people speak in business language, but I find that if we can move it from head to heart, right? If we can connect it to our own personal values, our own ideas of fairness and integrity and respect, that motivates us personally to embrace this work. So it really starts with that deep work, and then we can get into definitions of diversity, equity, inclusion, some things that we can do to get better. But it always starts with culture. I think that's the only way this work is going to sustain over time. Karen, you're on mute again. I'm sorry. Yeah.
As you're saying that, it's so important in terms of the value, the shared value, and lifting that up, because that's when you're able to move mountains.
Yes.
You're coming to that with this is who we will be, and this is who we'll learn to be, because we may not be there. We're always on the journey of being that something different, and just recognizing, putting in what I need to put in, the learning, the leaning in order to move with into that culture you're talking about building.
Yeah, we need people to understand. Again, we can make the business case, but I want people to think that this is the right thing to do. This is the right thing to do. It makes absolute perfect sense to me, because business case will change over time. But if I can get people to understand it's the right thing to do, that's way more motivating.
Absolutely. So Val, how do you reach them about the right thing to do when you're working with them?
Definitely a journey, and sometimes you just have to have a lot of conversations with a lot of people before any one little thing moves. when I think about our journey, our work really began in earnest in this field about 7 years ago when we became founding members of the Diversity Workforce Coalition, where I think a lot of NHBSR organizations are also members of. And our engagement with the DWC really kind of inspired us to foster DEI, not only across our company, but looking outside and across our clients, our community, and the broader investment industry. In terms of baking it into the DNA of our company, I mean, I love what Jermaine said about the culture because it's so important. I think that sort of was all surrounding us, but we chose to take a holistic approach. So we formalized our DEI Council about 2 years ago to oversee 5 main areas: talent acquisition, employee engagement and retention, DEI investment solutions for our clients, supplier diversity, and community engagement. And while, you know, strategic oversight by the DEI Council is great, progress requires action. So we've got dedicated working groups assigned to each of those important pillars. And those working groups are made up of DEI Council members and also individuals across departments and at all levels of the organization kind of working together. So all in, there's about 40 of us like actively working on initiatives to move us forward. Collectively, we've been able to increase and diversify our job candidate sourcing, find new ways to develop, engage, and nurture our employees. We've found very creative ways of helping our clients incorporate DEI into their investment portfolios. They all approach it a little bit differently. They define it even differently. So that becomes somewhat of a challenge. We're taking a look at our own suppliers in terms of their DEI practices, and we're constantly looking for meaningful ways to engage with our communities. So it's a very productive group of folks, but 40 out of 120 plus is not good enough because the DEI work is on all of us. So at the beginning of the year, we chose to roll out a comprehensive, intense training and education program firm-wide. We felt it was important that we're all on the same page, kind of speaking the same language as it relates to DEI. And it, you know, to echo what Jermaine said, has to be more than a one and done. You know, training is training, comes and goes. Ours, at least this inaugural program, is a year-long endeavor with monthly programs. So there's monthly touches, you know, ranging anywhere from an hour to 2.5 hours at a pop for all employees. Now, we recognize, as great as we'd like to think we are, we recognize that we had a gap in our internal resources in terms of developing and implementing such a program. So we chose to partner with an external DEI expert, which happens to be on this panel, or who happens to be on this panel, Jermaine Moore. And, you know, I was looking at chat earlier, someone was asking about how do you get joy into this? How, you know, where's the fun? And believe it or not, Jermaine makes it happen. The concepts, the way he brings them to life has been such an eye-opener for staff, and very engaged, and we're looking forward to the next monthly touch. But it's just a start, right? We know we have a lot of work to do, but the enthusiasm thus far for the needed changes is really high at the company right now, and we're looking to capitalize and build on that as we push forward with our DEI efforts.
Can I say something real quick? Val, thank you so much. You're too kind, but 33% of your employee base embracing this work is a big deal. I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit. That's significant level of engagement, considering that a lot of organizations, they have their committee and it's the 5 or 10 that care in a company of 500. So the fact that you have 1/3 of your employees that are embracing this work, taking some responsibility and accountability, is a huge step in the right direction. So the more people, the more minds we can help that care about this work, the more impact we can have.
Thanks, Jermaine.
Mhm.
Now, Dan, you know, when you're doing this, what does it look like? What does it look like for you and your sector?
Thanks, Karen. well, just to build on what we've heard in these last few minutes, and it's so helpful, affirming, convicting, challenging. So thanks. I think to Jermaine's point, which is essential, that it does have to start with who we are, what our culture is as an institution. Institutions are organisms of their own right, and they have an ethos. And if we're not consciously defining that ourselves, it is being defined by the culture beyond. And so just as we try to recognize that racism and white supremacy have been insinuated into every aspect of our national culture and even our communities closer to home, I think we need to displace that by insinuating into every aspect of our organizations this new consciousness, and of course following up that culture shift with concrete action. So I think to affirm some of what has been said just now, this can't be some ad hoc committee, something that we do for a time because it's in vogue. It's got to be a permanent committee that has got to traverse every aspect of your organization. It's got to be written into, start with maybe the symbolic things, that mission and vision statement that almost every organization has. We rewrote ours 3 or 4 years ago to pivot from seeing ourselves just as a construction company that builds, we think, some good clean energy systems, to one where our vision now is that our kids and grandkids and future generations, think of the 7th generation, will enjoy a clean environment and a just society throughout New England. And leading then into a mission which says we will lead our community in solving the environmental problems caused by fossil fuels while alleviating economic and social injustice. What if we were to conclude collectively that our businesses and nonprofits don't just exist to deliver a specific service or a particular good, but to advance the greater good? And I know that lives in, you're part of this conference because that's who all of you are everybody participating. I have no doubt about that. But think about the power that as institutions we can bring to bear when we train our institutions as vehicles for advancing that mission. So again, culture change, it's got to begin there. It's got to be written into the very foundation and permeate every aspect, not as a standalone to the side. And then I would just add that there's been a lot of mention of DEI, and appropriately there, it's getting such important attention. I do worry sometimes that for some organizations, it can become kind of cheap diversity, where the emphasis is placed on diversity, which is often understood in rather shallow ways. And that maybe there's one more letter worth adding to that acronym, which is a J for justice. We flipped them around a little bit because who doesn't like the Jedis? So at Revision, we call it our Jedi initiative: justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. And by that, we really mean to, yes, we've got to get our house in order. And we do have a long way to go. Being in the construction industry for years and years, maybe 10, at most 20% of our hires would be other than white male guys like me, still the dominant demographic in our industry. 2 years ago, we topped 20%. Last year, we were at 42%. And that's both women and people of color. So we have a long way yet to go. But yes, you've got to start by getting your house in order with multiple committees, multiple initiatives affecting every aspect of the business, but don't let it stop there. I'd say that's necessary, but not sufficient because of the urgency of the problem. I mean, how unconscionable is it that the average child of African descent has 1/10 the financial resources, which translates into life opportunities and lifespan itself, than the average child of European descent? And so for us, the J translates to a committee in which I'm most involved myself, meeting Friday mornings during working hours, which is looking at what legislative and other policy initiatives are moving in our state legislatures. We work across Northern New England, and how can we bring some of our voice, our resources, our tens of thousands of customers, the many more who receive our newsletter or follow us on social media, how can we actually bring resources to bear to stop some of the systemic inequities that allow this to continue and pursue repair? So I could say more about that. Many of you are aware and indeed involved in NHBSR's work around HB 544, the Divisive Concepts Bill. One small example of many, and it's got to go much deeper. That's trying to stop the worst from happening, retrograde. We've got to move forward as rapidly as we can. So I hope we aren't too transfixed on this one measure. But I do encourage any organization to not forget, whether it's in your acronym or not, that we can do so much more beyond our own doors pursuing the just society.
Thanks, Dan. And you're not alone in that. The JEDI is all over the country because sometimes you do have to say intentionally what you mean. Otherwise, it gets lost or puts a little bit to the shelf. So thank you for bringing that back up. Nadine, before we move to another question, I wanted to loop back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would have to echo everything that's been said here already, but also add that the how for us really has more to do with looking at how our systems interact with each other, right? So our culture is tied to our systems and nothing is happening independent of each other. And so really recognizing that and digging into that and trying to dismantle a lot of our practices, a lot of our traditions. I had a conversation just this morning with administration about why we do what we do. And it was interesting because it was never a question that had been asked before. And so it was the first time that we had to sit in a space and really think to ourselves, well, why do we do that? Like, why have we been doing that for years and no one asked what the reason for it was or to what end are we doing this? And so looking at our systems, I would also add that for us, our educational pieces are pieces around diversity, equity, and inclusion and social justice. There is a professional development component that's always existed. So there are workshops, there's opportunities to bring in trainers. But what is happening now that's different than before? The how piece is really getting to the individual, because the individuals on campus, we're who make up the culture, right? We're who are interacting with each other and interacting with students and interacting with colleagues. And more often than not, when we have individuals on campus from marginalized backgrounds, it is interactions with individuals that tend to be where the issues are occurring, more so than just the general out and about, you know, like what's happening in policy or what's happening in protocol. And so how do we shift ourselves? And so we're working towards individualized education while also working towards sort of the larger dismantling and the larger structural changes. And I'm going to say that the appetite for this is larger than it has been. There are a lot of individuals reaching out. So our library has resources, all kinds of readings, all kinds of trainings that folks can just sort of go to on their own time and assess. My office has those readings and trainings as well. And I think as we do this work, what becomes important is making sure that we do offer opportunity for self-reflection and self-growth and self-guidance, because not everyone is comfortable sitting in a space with colleagues engaging in this learning in that way. And so the opportunity for the individualized access is there as well.
Thanks, Nadine.
I think you're muted still. Just keep yourself off mute, you'll be good.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm back. So it is important for us to understand that diversity, we are talking about it now as a new thing, but it goes back to the 1940s. When President Truman was signing an executive order to desegregate the armed forces. So there is an act that happened. We continually do this when we talk about inclusion. There's another amendment that goes up. And what we have to understand that these acts or policies or bills can go in place, but if we're not actively living and breathing them, breathing life into them, and making them part of our everyday, part of our DNA as we're talking about. It's not, let's have a committee and one and done. It is threaded through, woven through everything we're doing, the decisions we're making, whether we build this building here or that building there, as you said, Val, the hiring practices. You know, what are you looking for in terms of preparing people, students in their communities, bringing them in a community that they've never been in, and helping them navigate that and come out as a different person as they came in. All of that is part of the process here. And I'm sure others would want to know in terms of how do you stay in this? You know, Jermaine and Nadine and myself, we're living this every day, right? We're living this every day and we stay in it. But what fuels you? What fuels you to know? And Dan, you said this too, you know you want something different for your children and the next generation. So when you think about what might be the barriers and challenges to all of this, what fuels you to keep at this? Where do you get your, I don't want to call it motivation because it's just kind of intrinsic human nature that's pulling on us, right? So what fuels you to keep figuring it out and being solutionary in spite of, in the face of? And anybody, love for you to share, what's that fuel for you?
I'll share real quick. I think for me, you hit the nail on the head. It's personal. It's personal for me. It has impact to me. And I think Dan was clear that it has impact to him. It's personal to him. And I think we have to find ways to make this work very personal to us, and realizing that our future is tied to it. The quality of life is all tied to this work. And we have to make it personal. Sometimes it's hard to make it personal, but that's where relationships come into play. The more people we know, the more we can be exposed to these stories that, you know, these students around campus, the more we hear their stories, we start to take it on as ours. And I think we have to make it personal. And I will also say that this is no longer a luxury. This is no longer a nice thing to do. If you are in talent acquisition at your organizations, this generation that's coming into the workforce, they're asking you directly, what are you doing in regards to diversity, equity, inclusion? Talk to me about your social impact. Every time I do a training, a recruiter steps up and say, I haven't been asked that question over the last month. If you're going to lose out on talent, the health of your company is at stake as well, because this next generation cares about these issues. As a matter of fact, I work with my local school district. They talk about race in second grade. They're reading books about race. So you have this generation coming up that's well aware, and a lot of us are playing catch up. Right now we have to run just to stay in the same place. It's an absolute imperative, and it has to be personal.
Thanks, Jermaine.
Mm-hmm.
Karen, there are a couple of really nice questions in the Q&A. I'm wondering if you have time to get to those now?
I would, but I don't see them.
Oh, let me share them. So for a company that does not have any formal DEI initiatives, but wants to start making change for its culture, what would you say is a good first step? Is it training, or do you have something you would recommend? Anyone?
Yeah, I'll take that question. I think for any company, whether it's for profit or not for profit, if you want to start with DEI, the first thing you'd want to do probably is get an external consultation happening. I think it's very hard for us to take a good look at ourselves and to assess ourselves fairly in an unbiased manner. So an external consultation can absolutely look through your policies, your protocols. They will interview staff, they will interview, you know, your HR department. They will get all the information they need, and then they will present that and they will show you your gaps. That's the first step. The second step is to be brave enough and courageous enough to embrace what it is that they find and what it is that they're telling you, and then to put those action steps in place to correct. So training, that's usually part of it. It's usually your go-to. It's sort of diversity 101, right? So you start to get your folks on the same page. You start to spread an understanding, a common understanding, a common appetite. But also I would say, first and foremost, for all of this to be successful after a consultation, is your leadership has to be on board. Your leadership has to set an example and model exactly what it is that they want for that particular business or organization.
Thanks.
I'll just underline that briefly and say, thanks, Nadine. Put it on that leadership team agenda and have it be a permanent item. So whether you've got great things to report, progress to show off or not, it's there and it's coming back at you every week. I would also say to Nadine's point about working with outside experts, you know, again, in the construction field, we work on a lot of new construction, and there are professionals from multiple sectors that actually make sure buildings stand. You don't do serious work without serious people who know and understand the work. And so we have to see that this work is serious, it is necessary, it's 400 years overdue. So I would urge, I think there is an imperative for organizations, whatever our budgets allow, to invest some resources in this work on a sustained basis. And one other very simple thing, a week or two after the murder of George Floyd last year, you know, everybody was reeling if you were watching the news. And one very simple thing we did was just call a company-wide Zoom. We were all on lockdown, and open it up for a few hours. And it went on for some hours into the night, and just listen and create a space. And we've done this again a few times since then. And I think that we've all got that technology. We can all begin the dialogue in such a simple way, but do please follow it up by going to professionals who can help guide this work. I have such appreciation for Jermaine and his work. And then come up with a plan which includes measurable points to hold yourself accountable to.
Jermaine, can you speak a little bit? I know that when we do this work, it's really important for us to have community agreements of how we're going to be with each other.
Yeah.
Could you share a little bit of that? Because it's just not coming in here, let's do this, but it's also building the culture of, as we go along, of how we're going to be with each other, how are we going to listen to each other, how are we going to lean in? So I'd love for you to share that. And then Val, I'd love for you to share what you're doing over in your organization.
I found in my experience that the emotion outside of hope and excitement that a lot of companies are struggling with is fear, right there. They don't want to do the wrong thing. They don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to make things worse. And what I found, a lot of people, a lot of companies who had an opportunity to make a statement were quiet because they feared that they would say the wrong thing or make things worse. Or the fear was, all right, now that I say it, I have to do something about it. There's accountability when I put that out there that I care about these issues. So one of the things that I try to really help organizations understand that this is a journey, that there are no off-the-shelf solutions to this work. What works for you, what's going to address the needs of your culture, your people, your industry are unique. And which means we're going to stumble sometimes. We're going to do things that are not going to work. So Nadine mentioned courageous and being brave. I think that's a prerequisite. You have to be willing to be uncomfortable. And so I try to give people permission to be uncomfortable, permission to make mistakes, permission to say the wrong thing, and we're going to address it in the moment and learn from it and move on. But creating this safe space where people can just bring their authentic selves, all their concerns, their challenges, their hopes, desires, is of the utmost importance. Because then we can have authentic and real interactions with one another. We can get to the root of some of these issues. So there's the work up front and before the actual training or dialogue is just as important as the dialogue itself, right? Because we need to create this safe space where we can engage with one another in an impactful way. So those community agreements are very, very important. And we have to always remind people of what they are, why they're there, and what it's going to look like and feel like.
Thanks, Jermaine.
Yeah.
There's a question, Val, I wanted you to offer, but there's a question I want you all to be thinking about. And we know this is true. I mean, we're right here. My daddy would say we're preaching to the choir, right? Because we're here. But then there's a space where people are just saying, like you said, Jermaine, earlier, why are we doing this? You know, what value does it have? And that's their way of being resistant to what you're trying to do. What are the kinds of approaches that you use to move through that, bring them along if needed be? And Val, please offer, and then just let's continue with responding to that question.
Yes, so many things are running through my head. I sort of picked up the DEI mantle at my firm. We didn't have anyone assigned to it. There was no directive that said, you must do this. Getting back to the whole notion of making it personal, I felt that tug. It was like, I don't know, almost like a calling back to my roots. Yeah, as the daughter of immigrants, first generation American, and growing up outside of New York City in a very richly diverse area from multiple perspectives, I felt like something was deeply missing. And so as I said earlier, I said about having a lot of conversations and then, floating the idea, how about a DEI council? And I remember one of my colleagues saying that, well, isn't that sad that we have to establish a council in order to make any progress in this area? And I said, no, it's not. It's gonna take a group of really motivated people to start moving in the right direction. And I tried to be very mindful when that council was being formed. I made sure the president of our firm was on that council. I made sure that a couple of people from the executive committee are on the council, but I also went all the way down, down into lower levels of the organization just to get broad perspective. We keep doing this work by being very intentional, by trying to be on top of what are our specific challenges. It takes constant self-reflection, both at the firm level and the internal level. It's like, you want to do it all, right? If you could boil the ocean, you'd boil the ocean, but not going to happen. Sometimes the best path forward is to just stop. And we sort of heard this theme earlier through the day, right? And look internally, reflect on what can I focus on to impact change, even if just a small one. Because while we all love to see wholesale changes like across the board, I think the incremental improvements are just as important.
Thanks, Val. So what approaches for those resistant?
I think we look at this as any other change management program. Think about the change in your organization that worked. All of our organizations have evolved, and we've had big changes happen, new systems, new focus, new strategy, new direction. And leaders were very intentional about, helping employees make this transition. And they got pushed back. They got people that were resistant to this change. But I almost think you look at this shift in mindset, this ability to put on this DI lens as a change initiative. And I think we communicate it because change is hard, and transition is hard, and it's slow, and it's psychological, and people have to get used to this new shift. And there's the 4 P's of communicating change. We have to be very clear about the why this work is important, why we're doing it. We have to give them a clear picture, a vision for the future, what that's going to look like. We have to have a plan and clearly articulate how we're going to get there. And we have to make sure people understand their part. What is their role in this DE&I work? But I would say expect resistance and think now about how you're going to address the whole idea about time being neutral. I think what we learned as we thought, hey, we're a post-racial country, is that progress doesn't come without, the opposition doesn't just go quietly in the night when things get a little better. They get stronger, they revamp, they try to figure out what can we do to keep things the way they are. So progress always comes with resistance. So we keep that in mind as you try to continue to progress in your organization. There's always going to be people pushing back. And I think we talked about HB 544. That's an example of that. There's some progress made. Companies are saying, we want diversity, equity, and inclusion work. We want to talk about anti-racism. We want to address these very sensitive issues in our work because people want it. And of course, here comes the opposition. No, you can't do that, right? We're going, at least if you're a state employee or a state contractor, but it's almost should have been expected that was going to happen. So know that it's going to happen in the micro as well in your environment. As you start to move forward in this area, you're going to get resistance, and think now about how you're going to address that resistance.
They oftentimes say, Jermaine, that when you get resistance, you know you're doing the right thing.
You got it. You got it. You got
You're
it.
on the right path.
You got it.
Dan.
I think sorry, just to build real quick, keeping our eye on the prize and helping others to see that vision. To your prior question, Karen, about staying in this work, I think it can help, and hopefully also for individuals who feel uncomfortable embarking down this path. You know, I wish that I was a more transcendent person and could claim that long before I met and fell in love with my South African wife and we had 3 kids that I was there and doing the work. It did honestly take this becoming intensely personal for me to give it the attention that it demands. And so shame on me if I'm, you know, demanding things expecting it to be similarly personal for people who don't yet have those connections. But if I can in some way help my sisters and brothers of European descent with a bit less of that melanin to see the promise in terms of the richness of our lives that awaits, maybe it's another conversation, but boy, do I feel blessed to be part of a family I never imagined I would be part of growing up, and to be exposed to whole new worlds, tremendously rich worlds that I never imagined. And boy, do all Americans, particularly people of color, but also people of European descent, boy, do we pay a price. In dollars and cents terms, it's estimated in the trillions of dollars by Citibank in lost potential in economic growth and creativity because we don't afford opportunity equally. But in human terms, in quality of life, how many public pools were filled in with concrete because folks of European descent couldn't bear to share those public goods with people of African descent, and how those poorer white folks lost in the process. A great new book on this theme is The Sum of Us, which I recommend to people, by Danielle. So there is so much promise, and I do hope that my fellow folks of European descent will see and begin to taste more as you get involved with the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire and realize this remarkable history. History isn't dead. Boy, is it alive if you explore it, and it is rich. There's a lot that awaits.
Dan, thank you. Val, thank you. Tremaine, Nadine, thank you, thank you, thank you. You're just pointing out the fact that we have to come out of our pods and explore, be in community that are not monolithic, be willing to step in, leave our disbelief assumptions at the door. And as you're saying constantly, we are so much better, stronger, and smarter when we're in community that is diverse. We use the word diverse, community that is just bringing themselves as they are. And Dan, you're talking about your own personal experience and how much enriched it is, and how you are so much different, better, stronger, smarter than you were then. Every time we walk out the door, we can make the decision to be those people, to reach in, lean in, start a conversation, learn what we share, what the values are we share, so that we can begin to build that power. We talk about power and privilege, leaning in and giving our power and privilege to shift, change, disrupt, whatever words we want to use, but creating something different. So much appreciate, Michelle, you and the organization for being in the challenge, stepping in and taking the challenge, and just being on this journey, because it is ongoing, as we know, 400 years, but we have to keep building those relationships. I just had a quote I wanted to share, and it really is about, I mean, we talked about courage, we talked about safe space, but we really want brave space. We want bold space. But I also want us to think about the fact that we have to let go. We have to regenerate. We have to leave something behind so we can pick something up that's much more beautiful, much more rewarding, that will fuel us forward. And so Andre Gide has this quote I love. He says, "Man cannot discover new oceans unless he has the courage to lose sight of the shore." So we're going to step out, not knowing, but knowing in faith, in trust, in community, that we're going to create this world that all children can become, see themselves, a quality life and the fullness of who they are. So Michelle, thank you so much for making this a part of this conference, and giving voice to what you so much are working towards.
Well, this has been an incredible conversation, and I thank each of you. You have just brought such wonderful insights to the topic, and while I know there was discussion about, bringing joy to this, it's an incredibly difficult conversation, or difficult work, I should say, not conversation, but it is also very joyous work. I listen and reflect on all that I have gained over the past year, where in my journey to move from just colorblind to trying to be that anti-racist that I really want to be. And so your sharing with us today has been such an incredible gift, and we are thankful for the time that you have shared with us. And I hope that we're all inspired to take on the challenge and keep our work going as we move forward. And I do invite you all to participate in the next Workplace Racial Equity Challenge. So just go to nhbsr.org/equity and invite your colleagues to be a part of it. It's an awesome opportunity, and thank you all, but especially Nadine for providing the inspiration for us. And thank you all for joining us for the conference. This is actually our closing session, and what better way to close a conference than with this conversation. So my thanks to all of you.